In the beginning of Cornelius Nepos' Life of Hannibal, he describes a little bit of background here. So we start with Hannibal, so we know we're talking about him. Hannibal, he is the son of this guy, so that's genitive, Hamilcar, and he's Carthaginian. So then we start with this little if clause. So if it is true, and then quod is going to be a which here, not a because. So going back likely to our true, like the truth, which name of no one is our subject, dubita, doubts. And then if you're following along with your notes, which you should be, this ut is going to introduce a substantive clause, basically just translated as that. So if it is true that the populus Romanus, subject, and then this is a syncopated verb, remember that? So we're going to we took off the VE, and that's a perfect subjunctive, so syncopated perfect subjunctive. So if the populus Romanus surpassed, and then omnes and gentes is going to be our direct object, and this is an ablative in virtue. And then this clause, I'm just going to underline all of it as a verb. This is a passive periphrastic, though. And so a passive periphrastic, remember, is where you have a gerundive with a form of the verb to be, and it shows obligation. So it'll be translated, since it's a um here, it's neuter, so the subject is it. It must not be denied. And the text also tells you this. So again, make sure you're following along with the Dickinson commentaries. And then that's going to introduce an indirect statement. So it must not be denied. Remember, I like to do a little squiggly for my subject of my indirect statement because it's accusative. So that Hannibal, here's our infinitive. Notice that it's infinitive because of that isse. So I'm going to do a double underline. And that's going to be a perfect infinitive. So something like surpassed. And then ceteris imperatores will be our direct object. And then this is another ablative, so like in wisdom. And then we have this correlative thing here. And again, the text mentions this tanto quanto means by as much as Hannibal surpassed, by just as much the populus Romanus again. Oops, that's our subject. And then Romanus goes with it. I'll just underline that too. Ante cedat, cunctas nationes. And then there's our ablative. So these kind of parallel each other. So Hannibal is better than all other generals by just as much as Rome is better than all nations. So a little comparison there, kind of an analogy. In part 2, Hannibal is going to be our subject. So I'm going to write him in here. Hannibal, underline. And so we'll say for, and this word in your notes tells you it means something like as often as. So as often as he, Hannibal. Your verb is congressus est. This is a deponent verb, meaning that it looks passive but is translated actively from our gradior, ingradior, re gradior, and so forth. So this means he came together. So when as often as he came together, cum eo. And again, in the notes, it tells us that this refers to the Roman people. So with them, meaning the Roman people, in Italy, little prepositional phrase. He always discessit superior. All right, and then again, you're given a little bit of help in your notes here. But if he, and then we'll jump down here. Now, I don't know that we've seen this too much. This is a subjunctive. It's a pluperfect passive subjunctive. And it's a subjunctive because we're in a conditional clause. So with the C meaning if, actually nisi meaning if not, but it's a conditional, so we're going to use a subjunctive for that. But if he had not been held back, and then by, this is ablative, by the jealousy, the spite, and then these are going together, and they're genitive. Suorum, remember, refers back to the subject, so our subject here is still Hannibal, and so it'd be like his own citizens. And then this is a locative. We can see that in a minute. And that means like at. So locative location. So, but if he had not been held back by the spite of his own citizens at home, and this is a little bit awkward. We're going to start here with datur. Remember that when you have the verb to see in the passive, it means seem. So again, Hannibal, he seems. And then this is a perfect active infinitive, and that's going to be translated as to have. So he seemed to have been able to surpass the Romans. So basically what we're learning here is that his own people were holding him back. And if he hadn't been held back by them, then for sure he would have defeated the Romans. All right, and so right here, he's finally he says, but, and this looks ablative, but if you look at it in your notes, it's actually nominative. So obtrectatio de vicet, and then where to tem, so subject, verb, direct, object, and then these are going to be genitive, so of many versus of the one, so those kind of go in there and then go in there, again telling us that the people have prevented him from really thriving. This last part is one whole sentence. So there's a few interesting pieces to it, and I'll break them down as we go along. You'll notice as we continue to read the life of Hannibal that our author, Cornelius Nepos, often uses these pronouns to connect between different things. And so this hic here is gonna, of course, mean Hannibal. So he'll use words like hic and ille, even some of the quis and things like that to connect us to previous clauses. So anyway, hic is our subject. And then we are going to jump down to con servavit. This is going to be our main verb in the sentence. And so this is something like he preserved. And if you read in the notes, there's actually commas here, so this might help us a little bit. But what he preserves or conserved was this hatred. And then this is an adjective that means paternal. He doesn't hate his father, but he has the same hatred that his father has. So this paternal hatred, and the hatred is towards the Romans. All right, and then we have this little clause here. The relictum is a perfect passive participle that's going to refer to the hatred. This is a little bit backwards, and it kind of not as normal in prose to see it, more normal in poetry for this to work like this. But basically, he preserved the paternal hatred against the Romans, having been left behind. And then this means as if. So as if by inheritance. So it's almost like one might inherit a hair color. That's kind of what this is. This is almost like that. Like it's just naturally continued that way. All right. So he preserved this paternal hatred against the Romans, seek in such a way, that it's going to be a results clause. So in such a way that this is interesting. He would rather put aside lay down his life than it being the hatred. So he'd rather die than stop hating the Romans. Interesting. All right, again, if you look in your notes, it gives you some help. This qui is going to be introducing what's called a relative clause of cause. All we're going to do is, instead of translating it as who, referring back to Hannibal, we're going to translate it as because. So because he indeed, and then our cum clause here I'll bracket this off for us, is going to be what's called a concessive cum clause. And we've seen this, I think, once or twice. And that just means you translate it as although. And again, I read this in the notes, and that's where I got that information. So because indeed, although Pulsus esset, so he had been pressed, and then this patria, long a, by his country, and then the notes tell you what this means, and this word is special because it takes a genitive. So he was in need of genitive foreign aid. He never destiterit, ceased bellare. So you can see bella, or bellum means war. So he never ceased to wage war. Supplying in with that in his mind, cum Romanis. So even though he wasn't able to wage war all the time because he was lacking in supplies or he was lacking in support of his country, he always hated the Romans, and he always held this kind of sacred in his mind. So so we get a good idea of Hannibal's characterization here in just the first mini chapter of Cornelius Nepos's work.